Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
And it's been really cool, seeing these sentences taken out of an entire body of work and how they have a whole new meaning on a wall.
And they really introduced and reaffirmed in the minds of all of us at Paul Artspace this notion of community and how community can be defined, and how art and art's function can be explored and defined.
Maybe they don't want a physical residence. They want an emotional residence. I'm Sarah Fenske. Nearly a decade ago, Mike Behle decided to transform his family's quiet property in Florissant into a unique resource for artists and writers. He called it Paul Artspace, and since 2013, the nonprofit has hosted about 100 artists across the world in its free residency program. Now Paul Artspace is changing its focus and pulling away from that property, and Mike Behle joins us today to explain why. So Mike, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Nice to be here.
And we're also joined today by Community Board member Marianne Lowry. She is also the curator and director of programs at the Granite City Art and Design District. So Marianne, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Hi. So Mike, you have a personal connection to Paul Artspace, both the organization and the property that it's long been based on. How did this organization and this founding home in Florissant come together?
Right, Sarah. So it goes back many years. Probably the beginning of that idea was once upon a time when I was in graduate school, and the idea of finding a way to build community within the arts and for the arts, and this is a property, as you noted, that's been in my family for many years. My uncle had that property until he passed away in 2011. And then upon that time, my partner and I were able to acquire the property. And it was shortly after that we launched Paul Artspace in 2013.
So I got to ask, it's such a unique name for an arts organization. Where did the name Paul Artspace come from?
So that is a little bit of a nod to Uncle Paul, who had the property.
Okay.
And, very generous person, a big person in my life. And so it was just a bit of a shout out.
So Marianne, you got involved as a volunteer about 3 years ago. What made this organization appealing to you?
Gosh, I've been friends with Mike and Jesse and other members of Paul Artspace for so long, so that already was so intriguing to me that there are a bunch of friends that had the same mindset of how to encourage people to be more active in the arts community here. So
okay, so this spoke to things you were already interested in.
Yes, connecting local artists to opportunities in St. Louis.
So of those artists, you've had approximately 100 artists get to enjoy these free residencies, and that's a lot of St. Louis artists, but it's also visitors from across the country, from across the world. Is there any sort of common theme to who tended to take advantage of this opportunity?
Well, it's really amazing looking back on that, Sarah. And one thing that I'm very proud of is that the organization very purposely structured its website to sort of hold it so that it can function as a repository of these artists that have come through the program. And so you can go to the website of Paul Artspace and see past residents and see the click on hyperlinks to their websites and just learn about their practice. But it was quite diverse and by design to support visual artists, writers, and curators. And the notion was that we would always try to set it up because we could house about 3 residents per session, that we could kind of put in a program in one particular session of a writer, a curator, and a visual artist. And sometimes that combination would be a local artist, maybe a regional artist, and an artist from outside the states. So it just has proven to be an incredibly fruitful and rich model for building future projects and just a tremendously rich discussion.
Is there a residency, looking back, somebody that was here that kind of stands out to you as this was a cool one?
Well, we oftentimes in the organization talk about our very first residents, which, funny enough, are from Ireland. Oh. And so these 2 artists came, and they came in the summer of 2013, and they really introduced and reaffirmed in the minds of all of us at Paul Artspace this notion of community and how community can be defined, and how art and art's function can be explored and defined. And I think they're in many ways great ambassadors, not only to us as an organization thinking about the work that we would go on to do, but I think to the community that they got to visit for close to 3 months in that summer of 2013.
Marianne, hearing Mike talk about this, I imagine with this organization, you must just meet the coolest people.
Yes, and actually the artists that he just referred to were one of my first connections to Paul Artspace. I just remember meeting them. I actually ran a gallery on Cherokee Street for a while, and so Mike introduced me to these two artists, and their idea was so absurd. I think they were doing some work with crystals or rocks or something, and it was just so absurd. But I was like, wow, there's not very many opportunities to explore rocks and crystals as a medium. But if there's any space around, Paul Artspace is the space that you can do it, and there's absolutely no limitations or rules.
So this all sounds so amazing. I feel like I'm totally on board. I love this. Let's send these cool international artists to Florissant. But you're kind of moving away from that. Mike, why is that?
Right. Well, that's right, Sarah. So it's it's a culmination of many things. I think that we as an organization had begun really asking the difficult questions of what is the model going forward? How do we find a way to continue doing the work that we say we do in our mission? And even though that property was in place for this nonprofit at no cost to the nonprofit, there are still just tremendous amounts of expenses to maintain that property, to pay the taxes for that property, to pay the insurance for such a program as this. And we found that as a very small arts organization, we were fortunate to find and still find support, but oftentimes that support would have to go to operational expenses. And I think we see going forward by moving away from that physical space, we can take the spirit of what Paul Artspace is and this notion of community and bringing folks together through the arts, and we can take our resources and really put that to that effort.
And so you're still going to be offering residencies, but people aren't necessarily or just aren't going to Florissant. Where are they going to go?
Right. So therein lies, the notion of partnerships. And, Paul Artspace has been very fortunate to enjoy partners over the years. And as we continue doing the work that we do, they partners step up and offer to help out. So, for instance, we had scheduled for this past summer, one of our programs is with our sister city in Stuttgart, Germany, and there was an artist scheduled to come, and everything was put in place with our friends at the Kransberg Arts Foundation. We had studio space provided for them. The organization, Paul Artspace, was paying for a month-long rental of an Airbnb kind of situation. And so all these things were in place, but unfortunately, like it has done with so many things, the pandemic, sort of squashed that.
International travel is hard right now.
That's true. That's true.
But the idea is sort of an Airbnb. You'll find the right housing for the person who you choose to come.
That's right. So in that sense, we sort of shift and not being sort of that physical space in Florissant, but we still maintain the work of being the facilitator to create these programs and to support these programs.
Marianne, do you feel like there's opportunity there, that maybe there's different spots that might be a better fit for certain people?
Absolutely. I think, where you are located, or where Paul Artspace was located, it's an amazing space, but I think you are limited by the location, and a lot of times people are like, oh, this might be too far from me, or I'm just not familiar with the area. So opening up the entirety of St. Louis to Paul Artspace programming is such an exciting way to move forward.
Mike, have you found that not every artist that you want to support wants a physical space? Maybe they don't want a physical residence. They want an emotional residence.
Right. No, that's a great question, Sarah. And I think that's the thing about Paul Artspace. And as we are a small and nimble organization, we listen to the residents. We find what they are looking for, and if we can connect that to our resources, our network, to find ways to support them, then we absolutely do. And I think that you're right. In this world that we're now in, because of the pandemic, and with technologies that we have, there are new models that are emerging. And I think the notion of a remote residency is a model that is there. And I think that part of what we do as facilitators of the arts and builders of community is that we say we don't have to be in this physical space. We can be in a space that we work together to sort of identify and define as community that we want to support and build.
So you're going to continue to solicit artists and writers to be a part of this, and then once you choose them, it'll sort of be an individual process of figuring out what makes sense?
That's right, Sarah. So the new model for us is that individual or interested parties can visit the website and access a worksheet of sorts that they sort of complete, and then that is sent into the organization. And if it's something that we see within our purview and our network and resources that we can get behind and support, then that's kind of how we embark on that new program or project.
So that website that Mike just mentioned, that's paulartspace.org if you want to learn more about this. And our guests today are Mike Behle. He's the founder of Paul Artspace, is now a board member. We're also joined by Marianne Lowry, who's a community board member. She's also the curator and director of programs at the Granite City Art and Design District. Marianne, I understand in addition to all these residencies, Paul Artspace has other things going on. And one of them is a project you led out at the airport. How did that come about?
Oh, gosh, it's been a couple of years in the making. So about 2 years ago, we were talking about ways to get involved with the community. And there was this amazing opportunity at the airport to host an exhibition in one of their galleries. And so we applied for it with the intention of working particularly with past residents. But due to all these changes at Paul Artspace, we were like, well, why limit ourselves to just former residents? Like, why not open it and introduce new artists to what's going on with the programming as well? So yeah, it's been 2 years in the making, and it just, we finally got it. It came to fruition. But it's a really cool exhibition. It's loosely based around the theme of 100 years of aviation at the airport. And so we were thinking about like the location of the airport. With location comes identities, the landscape, certain situations that have happened, whether they're positive or negative. And so we really just gave the artists involved like a very loose idea of what type of work should be as a part of it. And then they just ran with that. So
So that exhibit is called Longview. It opened just a couple weeks ago. It's going to be up at the gallery near the baggage claim until March of 2022. Marianne, what's a piece in that exhibit that really stands out to you?
Oh, gosh. I mean, they all do, to be honest.
I'm asking you to choose between your children here.
I know, right? I mean, it's been really interesting seeing what people came back with. So PSA, they're a group in St. Louis who do it's a public service announcement. They do a lot of text-based work, and so they work directly with the writers to pull out a sentence from their submissions, and it's been really cool, like seeing these sentences taken out of an entire body of work and how they have a whole new meaning on a wall. So what PSA did really stood out to me. Another piece is just Rachel Yoon, because their work is just it's just so fun, and like in an airport, which can kind of be a little bit of a stagnant place or a little bit, a lot of emotions happening in the airport. And so it's really cool seeing Rachel Yoon's work, which is kind of a kinetic plant that's shaking and dancing in the middle of the airport, surrounded by other fake plants that are...
I remember their work at the Contemporary Art Museum.
Yeah.
That's some pretty cool stuff, and certainly edgy for an airport.
Oh, totally.
In a good way, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
That's great. So, Mike, I mean, it feels like you've moved away from the physical site, and in some ways you're sort of unleashing yourselves upon the world.
Well, I think so, Sarah. I think that that exhibition that you were just discussing with Marianne, it's a point of pride, because I think in so many ways it really sums up the future direction. I think that it hits on all of the areas that we have as an organization always wanted to support, and that's visual artists, writers, and curators. It's getting into the community. It's bringing art to individuals and sort of creating possibility for space for that discourse. So yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, to the world through our partnerships with the sister cities of St. Louis, sister cities in Stuttgart, they've been really good partners for us here locally, and they help to support that exchange program with Stuttgart, Germany, which is a space there called the Gedak in Stuttgart. Is kind of the counterpart to the Paul Artspace here in St. Louis.
We also have a sister city in Senegal. I understand that's on the horizon for Paul Artspace?
It It's a new program that we're working towards. I'm on faculty at UMSL in the Department of Art and Design. I was fortunate to receive support from UMSL Global to put towards that work. And so it's, as you described it, it is another sister city for St. Louis, Missouri, and that's one that we're looking at bringing into this model. Yeah.
So there's a lot going on, and I should mention here, Mike, you used to be the director of this organization in addition to the founder, and now you're kind of just, I use my quote marks here, you're just on the board, and you're pushing for more communal leadership. What made you want to go in that direction?
That's right, Sarah. I mean, I think a lot of it is just reflecting on the work that we've done and the work that we hope to continue doing going forward. And it is so much about community, then I think the model of the organization should reflect that. And I think that, in part, is what led to some of that decisions.
So, Marianne, it's so hard for organizations that are entirely volunteer because everybody's busy with their day job, and then you get artists into it, and they don't just have a day job, they also have the art that they're making.
Yeah, it's a whole lifestyle.
Yeah. I mean, is the board able to step up without having a strong director in place? Do you feel like this organization has the energy and has the organization it needs to do all this work, and that there's so much enthusiasm for?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the whole group, the whole board, I mean, it's such a people coming from diverse backgrounds. There's writers, there's artists, there's everybody in between. And so, I mean, Mike and I were just talking before, 2 heads are better than 1. So, like, when you think about 15 heads, I mean, just imagine all the things that can happen.
Right, right. And I think, to add on to that, part of the structuring of the board is the ancillary board. So there's advisory board, there's community board, and there's the executive board. And it's at that executive board level that all of sort of the wonderful input and idea and support that Marianne's talking about that comes from the diversity of the ancillary boards leads to that executive board where the decisions are made to kind of move the ship forward.
So, Mike, I want to bring it back to this physical space in Florissant for our final minute here. This is a space that has been in your family for a long time, and I understand that it's not going away just because the residencies aren't going to be there. In fact, you yourself have moved to this space. You're living there now.
Well, that's true, Sarah. In many ways, it's a kind of a reality check of feeling as though I've come full circle. And I don't know how I feel about that always, but it's my partner and I now live there. We had lived for 13 years in the Bevo neighborhood in South City, and we now live out there on the former grounds of Paul Artspace.
And do you feel like you may do an occasional Paul Artspace event there just for old time's sake?
Absolutely. It's definitely it's definitely going to happen. One of the things that we do annually is that, or we did annually, was the bonfires, and it was really just a nice time to have community out on the grounds to come together, and I definitely see things like that continuing to happen at the space.
Okay, so Paul Artspace continues, and Paul Artspace's home continues to be a place where people are talking about art and being inspired.
Most definitely.
Well, Mike Behle, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Mike is the founder of Paul Artspace and also associate chair at the University of Missouri St. Louis's Department of Art and Design. I also want to thank Marianne Lowry. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And Marianne is a community board member of Paul Artspace and also curator and director of programs at the Granite City Art and Design District. St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.